Hello, dear viewer. Before starting this story, please subscribe and like it. Enjoy watching.
Beneath the towering dome of St. Peter's Basilica lies a history that is not only gilded in gold, but smeared with something far more unsettling. Today, the Vatican is remembered as a symbol of faith, power, and unbroken tradition. But in the dark centuries of the Middle Ages, that holy sanctuary became a stage for acts that seemed torn from the pages of a Gothic horror tale. Among them were the corpse crownings, rituals in which dead popes were dragged from their graves, clothed in papal robes, seated on thrones, and subjected to ceremonies or trials as though they still drew breath. Imagine the scene: the flicker of torchlight across stone, the stench of decay masked by incense, bishops gathering in solemn ranks before a body no longer capable of protest. These were not merely grotesque displays. They were weapons in the brutal wars of politics and power that rage within the Church itself. And to understand them, to see why men of God turn corpses into symbols, we must journey into one of the darkest spectacles ever recorded, the infamous Cadaver Synod. Rome in the late 9th century was not a city of peace. It was a battlefield of families, nobles, and factions, each clawing for control over the papacy, the greatest prize in all of Christendom. The papal throne was not a seat of quiet holiness. It was a weapon, a crown of influence that kings and emperors sought to bend to their will. In this storm, Pope Formosus reigned, a man both respected and despised. When he died in 896, many thought his controversies would be buried with him. But Rome, hungry for vengeance, had other plans. Months after his death, his successor, Pope Stephen VI, ordered that Formosus be dug from his tomb and placed on trial. Yes, a corpse on trial. The body was lifted from the crypt, its flesh decayed, its bones stiff with rot. It was dressed again in the sacred vestments of the papacy, seated upright on a throne before the council, and made to face charges of violating canon law. A deacon was forced to speak in his name, answering accusations hurled against a body incapable of speech. It was not only a trial, it was humiliation beyond the grave. The verdict, of course, was guilty. The corpse was stripped, 3 fingers of blessing hacked from its right hand, and at last the body was dragged to the streets of Rome before being cast into the dark waters of the Tiber. The Cadaver Synod remains one of the most chilling episodes in church history, a grotesque reminder that even in death, popes were not beyond the grasp of politics and revenge. The trial of Pope Formosus was not an isolated madness, not some strange fever dream confined to a single pope's obsession. It was the beginning of a pattern, proof that in medieval Christendom, the grave offered no safety from politics. The Cadaver Synod left Rome shaken. Ordinary citizens whispered of omens. When Formosus' desecrated body washed up on the banks of the Tiber, stories spread that miracles surrounded it, that God himself was outraged at such sacrilege. For a moment, it seemed as though Rome might reject this grotesque theater. Pope Stephen VI, the man who orchestrated the trial, was soon imprisoned and strangled in his cell, a fitting end for one who had turned faith into a grotesque spectacle. And yet, the corpse crownings did not die with him. Formosus was reburied in the basilica with honor, but his legacy remained a weapon. Successors could not resist revisiting his memory, using his corpse and his reputation as pawns in their own games of power. The Synod had set a precedent. If the living pope could not be defeated, the dead one could be used instead. In this chilling truth lay the seed for future corpse crownings, where vengeance stretched not only across borders and bloodlines, but across death itself. To understand why popes were exhumed, crowned, judged, or cursed, we must step back and look at the medieval papacy as it truly was. A throne of God, yes, but also a prize of kings and emperors. The papacy in the Middle Ages was not merely spiritual. It was political power incarnate. Whoever controlled the pope could bless empires, crown monarchs, and excommunicate enemies. To hold sway over Rome was to hold sway over Christendom. And so, popes became more than men. They became symbols. And symbols can be manipulated, even in death. Rival factions discovered that a corpse could still be useful. Propped up, dress in robes, declare holy or heretical depending on the needs of the moment. In some cases, dead popes were exhumed and crowned again, as though the ritual could cleanse doubts or cement legitimacy. In others, they were dragged out for public judgment, humiliated before the eyes of Rome, so their enemies might rise higher in their absence. The corpse crownings were not merely grotesque ceremonies. They were political weapons sharpened on the bones of the dead. Nearly 2 centuries after the Cadaver Synod, the shadow of corpse politics returned. By the early 12th century, Europe was torn between papal authority and imperial power. The investiture controversy, one of the great conflicts of the Middle Ages, pitted popes against kings over the right to appoint bishops and control the church's wealth. In this storm stood Pope Paschal II. His reign was marked by chaos, concessions, and bitter enemies. When he died in 1118, some hoped his body might finally rest in peace. But rest was a luxury medieval popes rarely enjoyed. His successor, Gelasius II, was hounded into exile while imperial partisans seized control of Rome. They dug up Paschal's corpse, not to crown it, but to desecrate it. Accounts speak of his remains being scattered, a brutal display meant to erase his legacy. In the eyes of his enemies, even death was no shield against condemnation. It was a savage echo of Formosus, proof that papal bones could still be made to serve the living. Not all corpse crownings were about vengeance in the moment. Some were about rewriting history itself. Centuries earlier, in the 7th century, Pope Honorius I had been accused of heresy, of tolerating monothelitism, a doctrine condemned by the Church. His name lingered in controversy long after his death. For generations, popes and councils debated whether Honorius had betrayed orthodoxy. Finally, in 869, nearly 200 years after his death, Honorius' body was exhumed. He was condemned as a heretic, his memory cursed, and his remains disgraced. Imagine it. A pope once hailed as the voice of Peter, dragged from his tomb centuries later to be branded as an enemy of the faith. Honorius' case revealed another face of corpse politics. Not just immediate vengeance, but the power to reach backward through history and reshape the past, using the bones of a pope as a canvas. With each corpse crowning, each exhumation, each desecration, the message became clearer. The papacy was too important to leave even the dead unguarded. Faithful or heretic, righteous or corrupt, no pope was beyond the reach of politics. Their corpses were used as puppets in battles they no longer understood. Their legacies twisted to serve causes that bore little resemblance to the faith they once defended. But beneath the horror was something even darker. Fear. Fear that the wrong pope's memory could undermine the authority of the living. Fear that enemies might claim legitimacy through the dead. Fear that the past, left uncorrected, might weaken the present. And so, corpses were enthroned, crowned, tried, cursed, and cast into rivers, all in the desperate attempt to control not just the future of the Church, but its history itself. The corpse crownings eventually faded, their grotesque ceremonies remembered with shame by later generations. The Church, seeking to cleanse its image, quietly buried these scandals beneath layers of reverence and silence. But the echoes remain. To this day, the Cadaver Synod stands as one of the most infamous moments in the history of the papacy, a reminder of how fragile sacred power can become when consumed by earthly politics. It shows us that in medieval Europe, faith and fear were inseparable, and that the throne of St. Peter, for all its divine aura, was still vulnerable to hands of men willing to drape bones in silk and call it justice. In the end, the corpse crownings remind us of a truth as chilling now as it was then. In the Middle Ages, even the dead were not free.